The wind howled across the jagged peaks of the Carpathians, carrying with it the weight of forgotten centuries. Professor Adrian Vayner tightened his cloak around his shoulders as his boots sank into the snow-caked path. He was far from the bustling lecture halls of Prague, far from the safety of civilized light. Here, among the skeletal remains of monasteries abandoned to time, he sought something older than any cathedral, older even than the pyramids, the Codex of the all-seeing eye. He stopped to catch his breath, leaning on his walking staff. Through the mist, the silhouette of the monastery finally revealed itself. Tall, angular spires reaching into the bruised gray sky. Its stone was blackened, its walls scarred by centuries of storms. The iron gate that once barred the entrance now leaned crookedly, creaking in protest whenever the wind pressed against it. Adrian's chest tightened with awe and dread. Legions whispered of this place. Pilgrims had spoken of monks who vanished after chanting the forbidden psalms. Shepherds told of lights flickering in its windows, though no one lived within. Even the Ottomans, when they swept through these mountains, left this place untouched, as though the stones themselves warned against trespass. But he was not here for superstition. He was here for truth. Inside, the monastery was colder than the mountain air. The grand door groaned as it shut behind him, muffling the storm outside. A darkness pressed in, broken only by the faint gleam of candle stubs that burned impossibly, as though they had waited centuries for his arrival. His boots echoed on the flagstones as he entered the library. It was vast, more cathedral than archive. The shelves stretched high into shadowed arches, sagging beneath the weight of tomes that crumbled at the edges. Ornate carvings wound along the walls, spirals, triangles, interlocking patterns that hurt the eyes if stared at too long. At the far end, beneath a window of frosted glass, a long oak table stood, and on it, unfurled like a trap waiting to be sprung, lay a parchment of yellowed skin. Adrian approached slowly, as though walking toward the center of a dream. The scroll was massive, its edges curled inward. Upon it, drawn in ink that shimmered faintly under the candlelight, was a triangle enclosing an eye. Around it spiraled countless lines of text, written in a script no single civilization could claim, fragments of Sumerian cuneiform woven into Egyptian hieroglyphs, interspersed with angular runes Adrian had never seen. It was as though languages had been melted together into one, all converging toward the eye. He whispered, his breath misting in the cold, the Codex of the all-seeing. I? The stories had not lied. The sound of footsteps echoed behind him. Adrian spun around, his hand tightening on his staff. A figure emerged from the shadows between the shelves, cloaked in black, her hair damp with melted snow. Still chasing ghosts, Adrian? The voice was sharp, confident, too familiar. Alara, he said flatly. His rival, Dr. Alara Corin, removed her gloves, her eyes glinting with the same mixture of calculation and curiosity that had unsettled him back in the universities. She had once been his colleague, even his friend, until her ambition had devoured her principles. And now, of all places, she stood before him at the very doorstep of the Forbiddens. This place belongs to no one, she said, striding toward the table. Knowledge belongs to whoever can seize it. You know what the legends say, Adrian muttered. Those who seek the eye vanish. And yet here we are, she replied with a smile. They studied the Codex together, though distrust hummed between them like static. Adrian unrolled the parchment further. The ink lines shifted subtly, as though alive. Symbols rearranged themselves when viewed from different angles. It's a palimpsest, Adrian said, his fingers tracing the margins. Layers of writing. Each language overwrites the last, but they're all preserved. It's meant to be? Read in sequence. Alara leaned close, her breath warm in the cold air. Then start decoding. Adrian hesitated. The warnings carved into the library's walls returned to his mind. Do not open the eye. Do not invite the architect. But the scholar within him, the man who had dedicated his life to unraveling forgotten tongues, could not resist. He began to translate. The first lines spoke of creation. Before pyramids rose, before rivers carved valleys, there was the architect. The architect inscribed form upon the void, drawing with fire the patterns of existence. The architect's eye sees all, for all is born from its design. Elara's eyes glimmered. This isn't myth, it's cosmology. A blueprint of reality. Adrian frowned. Or a delusion written by madmen. Yet even as he said it, he felt the words vibrating through him, resonating with some hidden chord of truth. As they worked, the library itself seemed to respond. The candles flared brighter when they spoke certain phrases. The shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls. Once, Adrian swore he heard a whisper, not from Elara, not from himself, but from the scroll itself. Unseal the final passage, and all shall be revealed. That night, they lit more candles and continued their work. Hours melted into a haze of ink and firelight. When Adrian finally laid his head against the desk, exhaustion claimed him. He dreamed of stairs. An endless staircase spiraling downward. Into darkness, its walls carved with triangles that pulsed faintly as he descended. At the bottom waited the eye, vast as the sky, its iris opening like a door. A voice filled his skull. You are chosen, Adrian Vayner. Unseal me. He woke with a start. The candles had burned low. Elara was asleep across the table, her head resting dangerously close to the scroll. The eye seemed to glimmer faintly, watching him. Adrian shivered. He pulled his cloak tighter and turned his gaze away. But in his chest, a terrible certainty had already rooted itself. The Codex was not. A relic of the past. It was alive. The library had no clocks, no bells to toll the hours, yet time itself seemed to warp as Adrian and Elara worked. Days and nights bled together into a seamless stretch of candlelit labor. They barely ate, barely slept. Their world had shrunk to the long oak table, the shimmering parchment, and the whispers that stirred at the edge of hearing. Adrian rubbed at his temples, eyes stinging from endless lines of script. This doesn't make sense, he muttered. No culture ever combined these symbols. That's the point, Elara said, leaning across the scroll. Her fingers hovered above a string of interlocking glyphs. This wasn't written by one culture. It was written by something older than culture itself. Look here, Egyptian. Cartouches next to Akkadian numerals, stitched together with geometric proofs. It's not history, Adrian. It's design. Adrian's jaw tightened. He didn't like the way she said that word, design, with reverence instead of caution. Even if it is, that doesn't mean we should. Don't start. Her eyes flicked up to meet his. You want this as badly as I do. He wanted to argue, to deny it, but his silence betrayed him. For decades, Adrian had studied the fragments. Whispered mentions of the Codex in burned manuscripts, symbols, half erased on monastery walls. Now it lay before him, real, breathing. Alive. They pressed deeper into the text. The Codex spoke of the great architect, a being who had carved the foundations of reality, drawing stars into orbits and binding matter into form. Every diagram in the scroll radiated mathematical precision, spirals that echoed galaxies, triangles within triangles collapsing into infinity, numbers repeating in patterns that seemed to pulse if stared at too long. The architect inscribed, "The lattice of existence," Adrian read aloud. The eye is not a symbol, but a window. Through it, all knowledge flows. Through it, all truth is revealed. Elara smiled. a window into creation itself. But alongside revelation came warning. In the margins, jagged text twisted between languages. The eye does not open without a sacrifice. Beware the knowledge that unmakes the knower. Adrian ran his hand across the parchment, disturbed. The ink felt warm beneath his skin, as though alive. Ilara, he said quietly, what if this isn't meant for us? What if we're trespassing on something no human was ever meant to touch? Don't be naive, she shot back. Knowledge is never forbidden, only hoarded, only hidden by those afraid of losing power. Do you want to spend your life in dusty halls, lecturing about half-truths, or do you want to see what no one else has dared? Her words cut deep because they struck at his weakness, the hunger gnawing at him since he was a boy lost among library stacks, dreaming of secrets buried under time. The deeper they translated, the stranger the library became. On the second night, Adrian noticed the shelves had shifted. Books that had been stacked neatly were rearranged into triangular patterns, spines forming a perfect pyramid. Ilara swore she hadn't touched them. On the third night, shadows grew bold. As Adrian recited an inscription aloud, the silhouettes of books and candle holders twisted into shapes that didn't match their sources. For a heartbeat, he saw eyes blinking within them. On the fourth, he nearly screamed. He had bent over the scroll to sketch a diagram when he saw his reflection in the parchment, not his own weary face, but one with the eye staring back at him from the center of his forehead. It blinked once before fading. He didn't tell Elar Adat by. The fifth day, exhaustion had stripped them down to raw nerve. There's a pattern, Ilara whispered, stabbing her finger at a constellation diagram. Look, the eye aligns with the stars at certain intervals, solstices, equinoxes. But it's more than that. The Codex is describing architecture, a mechanism. Adrian leaned closer despite himself. A mechanism? Yes, look at this. When the eye symbol on the parchment is aligned with the triangular carving in the library's window, it unlocks something. A chamber. Adrian recoiled. You're guessing. She shook her head fiercely. I'm right. This isn't just text, it's an instruction manual. The monks built this monastery around it. They weren't guarding the Codex. They were guarding whatever lies beneath it. Adrian's stomach churned. We shouldn't. But Ilara was already moving. She dragged a ladder to the wall, and climbed toward the tall, frost-stained window. Beneath it, carved into the stone, was indeed a triangle, faint, worn by centuries, but unmistakable. Help me, she ordered. Adrian hesitated, then reluctantly lifted the parchment. Together, they angled it so the eye drawn upon it aligned perfectly with the triangle carved in stone. The instant they did, the library shuddered. The candles flared violently, their flames stretching into unnatural shapes. The shelves groaned as though dragged by invisible hands. From the depths of the floor came a grinding sound, ancient stone grinding against stone dot at the center of the room. The oak table trembled, and with a thunderous crack, the floor beneath it split apart, revealing a spiral staircase plunging into darkness. The air that rushed up was cold, older than the mountain, carrying with it a faint metallic tang. Adrian staggered back, horror in his eyes. What have we done? Ilara smiled, her face pale in the candlelight, but her eyes burning with triumph. We've opened the way. That night, Adrian couldn't sleep. The open staircase yawned like a wound in the floor, breathing its chill into the library. He sat hunched by a dying candle, staring at it. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, to collapse the stones and bury the stairway forever. Yet he knew Ilara would never let him. And worse, he knew that deep down, he didn't want to stop her. He wanted to see Dot as dawn bled gray light through the frost-streaked windows. Ilara descended the first step without hesitation. Her lantern flared against the dark. She looked back at Adrian. "Well?" she asked. He swallowed hard. Then he followed. The spiral swallowed them both. Approximately 1900 words. Section 2 ends here. The spiral staircase coiled downward, its steps slick with centuries of moisture. Adrian's lantern cast long, trembling shadows on the walls, which were carved with symbols he half recognized from the Codex. Triangles nested within triangles, constellations twisted into impossible alignments. The further they descended, the more the carvings pulsed as though faintly lit from within. The silence was suffocating. Each footstep echoed into the void, swallowed quickly by the depths. Adrian lost all sense of distance, whether they had gone down 100 steps or 1,000, he could not tell. The air grew heavy, metallic, tinged with something that stung his lungs. It was the smell of stone that had never been touched by daylight. At last, the stair spat them into a cavernous chamber. Adrian stopped dead, his breath catching. The space was vast, larger than the cathedral above. Its ceiling arched high into shadow, its walls covered in golden mechanisms, wheels, cogs, and orreries moving slowly with no visible force, as though powered by the heartbeat of the world itself. The grinding hum of their motion filled the chamber with a low vibration that Adrian felt in his bones. At the very center lay the eye. It was not painted or carved, but inlaid into the floor itself. A colossal stone iris, its pupil a deep hollow, filled with still black water. Around it spiraled concentric rings of runes. Adrian felt his knees weaken at the sight, as though the eye stared back at him, measuring his worth. Ilara whispered, awestruck, "The chamber of the architect." They approached cautiously. On a raised pedestal near the pupil rested an obsidian box no larger than a man's head. Its surface was etched with the same shifting script as the Codex, words that seemed to ripple like water under Adrian's gaze. The box vibrated faintly, as if containing something that strained against its prison. Adrian tore his eyes away. "We shouldn't be here. This chamber was sealed for a reason." Ilara's lantern glinted against her smile. "This is what we came for. The Codex was only the map. This is the treasure." "Or the curse," Adrian muttered. She ignored him, circling the pedestal like a predator. Her voice dripped with hunger. "Think of what's inside. Knowledge from before history. Power written into the bones of the universe. Whoever controls it is destroyed by it," Adrian snapped. He gestured to the runes on the floor. "Every warning we read pointed here. It said the eye requires sacrifice, that it unmakes the knower." Ilara turned to him, eyes blazing. "Or it remakes them. Adrian, don't you see? This is bigger than us, bigger than any empire. We could end ignorance, end war, reshape humanity into something more." His stomach turned. "No, you want to play God." She stepped closer, her shadow stretching long across the glowing iris. "And you want to cower in the dark. That's why you'll always be a footnote in history." The chamber groaned suddenly, as if their voices had stirred something ancient. The mechanisms in the walls accelerated, wheels turning faster, constellations rearranging above them in shimmering arcs of light. The black water in the eye's pupil rippled. Then came the voices. They weren't sounds so much as vibrations inside. Adrian's skull, layer upon layer of whispers, overlapping in languages he half knew, and others he couldn't name. His vision blurred. He saw not the chamber, but visions flooding through him. Cities burning under a blood-red sky, oceans boiling, pyramids rising from sand only to sink again into dust. And above it all, a vast shape, faceless except for one colossal eye opening in the void. Adrian staggered, clutching his head. The voices coalesced into words that thundered inside him. "Unseal me." He gasped for air. Ilara, however, only stood taller, transfixed, her face glowing in the shifting light. She extended her hand toward the box. "No!" Adrian lunged, grabbing her wrist. "You don't know what you're doing." Her eyes flashed with fury. "Let go, Adrian. This is what we've spent our lives chasing. I won't let your cowardice ruin it." They struggled at the pedestal, shadows dancing wildly around them. The obsidian box vibrated harder, sensing their conflict. For a moment, Adrian thought he saw cracks, spider webbing across its surface, glowing faintly from within. "Elara, listen to me," he pleaded. "We've already seen what this knowledge does. It twists reality. You're afraid?" she hissed, wrenching free. "I'm not." Before Adrian could stop her, she pulled a small knife from her coat. Without hesitation, she drew it across her palm. Blood welled up, dripping scarlet across the black stone. The effect was immediate. The chamber roared. The runes around the eye ignited in blinding gold. The water in the pupil boiled, then evaporated into steam that spiraled upward into a vortex. The obsidian box split open with a sound like shattering glass, releasing a blast of cold wind that extinguished Adrian's lantern. And from within poured light, not light as the sun knows it, but something sharper, denser, alive. It writhed through the air in tendrils of geometry, shifting from triangles to circles, to impossible shapes that stabbed at the mind. Adrian staggered back, his vision tearing apart. The voices rose into a scream. The architect's presence filled. The chamber-god Adrian saw Elara, her face illuminated by the radiance. She was laughing, her arms outstretched as the light wrapped around her like a lover. The symbols etched across the walls burned themselves into her skin, glowing veins spreading. Across her body, Elara. Adrian shouted, but his voice was swallowed by the roar. She turned her head toward him, eyes blazing with unnatural brilliance. Her voice was no longer hers, but layered, distorted, as though 1,000 beings spoke through her throat. "Beautiful, Adrian. Can't you see? It's everything we dreamed of." He shook his head violently. "It's killing you." But even as he said it, he realized he was wrong. It wasn't killing her. It was changing her. The eye on the floor opened wider, its pupil expanding into a yawning abyss of blackness. The concentric rings spun like gears, locking into place. From the void below, something began to emerge, not a form, not flesh, but a pattern of living symbols that stretched beyond comprehension. Adrian felt his sanity buckle. He saw worlds folding into one another, time splitting and reforming, entire civilizations crumbling in the blink of the eye. And in every vision, Elara stood at the center, her body dissolving into glyphs, her laughter echoing across eternity. Truth struck him like a blade. She wasn't opening the box for knowledge. She was offering herself as its vessel dot, and the architect was answering. Adrian fell to his knees, clutching the Codex still in his satchel. The scroll burned hot against his side, as though urging him to act. His mind reeled back through the translations, searching for a way out, a way to undo what had begun. One fragment blazed in memory. The eye can be sealed only by the will of one who rejects its truth. His heart pounded. That meant he staggered to his feet. The chamber buckled around him, stones cracking as if the mountain itself was being rewritten. Elara's form blurred, half human, half symbol, her eyes twin flames of the architect's gaze. She reached for him, her voice echoing like thunder. "Join me, Adrian. Together we can tear down the veil. We can see everything." He took a trembling step back. His hands shook, but his voice came steady. "Some truths aren't meant to be seen." The chamber screamed, a cacophony of stone, metal, and voices colliding. The eye widened further, its black pupil swallowing the pedestal. Adrian knew they were seconds away from collapse, or worse, transformation beyond recognition. And still Elara smiled, drenched in radiance, her blood searing across the floor like fire. She had chosen her path. Adrian realized he would have to choose his. The chamber convulsed as if the mountain itself were alive, groaning in protest of what had been unleashed. The concentric rings spun with grinding force, sparks leaping between their golden grooves. The great iris in the floor yawned open wider, the blackness within stretching toward infinity. Adrian staggered against the pedestal, clutching the satchel that held the Codex. His lungs burned, his eyes watered, his ears rang with overlapping voices that wouldn't stop. He felt them crawling through his skull, pouring visions into him, galaxies collapsing into pinpricks, endless staircases twisting downward, entire histories replaying and vanishing in the blink of an eye. And above it all, the eye dot, it hung suspended. Now, no longer bound to the floor, a vast, radiant orb of shifting geometry and living symbols. Its pupil dilated like a black sun, its gaze searing through flesh and bone straight into Adrian's soul. He dropped to his knees, choking. His body screamed to give in, to let the eye tear him apart and remake him. But Ilara had already surrendered. She hovered inches above the ground, her arms spread wide as the living light wrapped around her. The runes carved across the chamber had etched themselves into her flesh, pulsing with every heartbeat. Her hair floated weightlessly, her face raptured, as though she had become the axis of the architect's design. "Adrian," she called, her voice layered and distorted, echoing in 1,000 tongues. "It's magnificent. I can see everything, the threads of existence, the lattice that holds reality together. Don't fight it. Join me." Adrian shielded his eyes, his heart breaking. "Ilara, it's not you anymore. It's using you." Her gaze snapped toward him, blazing with the intensity of a sun. "No, I am it. The architect needed a vessel, and I have become the eye. Through me, humanity will transcend." The air trembled with her words. The walls wept dust. The black pupil swelled further, and from its depths emerged tendrils of impossible geometry, structures folding and refolding in ways the human mind could not comprehend. Adrian's vision blurred, his stomach heaved, and for a moment he thought his very being would unravel. He gripped the Codex desperately. Its parchment pulsed with warmth, as though alive in his hands. Words flared across its surface, rearranging themselves into a final message. The eye may be sealed by the one who refuses its gift. Knowledge rejected becomes a barrier. Ignorance becomes salvation. Adrian's throat went dry. The meaning was clear. To close the eye, he would have to turn away from everything he had sought his entire life. All the years spent chasing fragments, all the sacrifices, all the hunger for truth, he would have to let it go. He looked up at Ilara. She was radiant now, her skin cracking open to reveal searing light beneath, her veins etched with glowing glyphs. She smiled down at him, her face both beautiful and horrifying. "You've always been afraid," she whispered, though the sound shook the chamber. "Afraid to look too deep. But I see now everything we wondered, everything we doubted. It's all here. There are no more questions, Adrian. Only answers." Tears burned his eyes. He had dreamed of this moment his entire life, the ultimate revelation, the truth of the architect, the blueprint of existence itself. And yet, staring at her, staring at the monstrous eye that devoured the chamber, he knew answers without limits were not liberation. They were annihilation. The ground buckled. Stones cracked and fell into the abyss. The golden mechanism shrieked as their wheels spun out of control, scattering sparks like dying stars. Adrian forced himself to his feet. His body shook with exhaustion, but his resolve hardened. He clutched the Codex to his chest and shouted above the roar, "I choose not to know." The parchment burst into flames in his hands. Not fire of this world, but pure white light that burned without heat. The Codex screamed as though alive, the voices wailing in rage and despair. Alara shrieked, her form twisting, collapsing between human and symbol. No, don't reject it. Adrian, you fool. You could have everything. The eye convulsed, its pupils shrinking violently as the incantation tore through it. The tendrils recoiled, folding back into the abyss. The chamber quaked so violently, Adrian thought the entire mountain would collapse. He screamed the final words of the burning Codex, the syllables tearing his throat raw. I choose ignorance. I seal the eye. The eye let out a sound that was not a sound but a collapse of silence, an implosion of being itself. For a blinding instant, Adrian saw it all, the architect's gaze vast and eternal, staring into him with a fury that transcended existence. Then, like a candle snuffed in the wind, it was gone. The chamber plunged into darkness, the mechanisms ground to a halt. The runes faded, the abyss sealed with a thunderous crack. Ilara's scream echoed one last time, then cut off abruptly. Adrian collapsed to the stone floor, gasping, the ashes of the Codex crumbling between his fingers. When he awoke, the silence was absolute. The chamber was dark and still. The pedestal was empty, the box shattered. The iris in the floor was closed, its rings inert stone once more. Ilara was gone. No trace of her remained. Not even ash. Adrian lay there for a long time, his body trembling, his mind hollow. He had won, if winning meant survival. But it felt like defeat. He dragged himself to his feet, every bone in his body aching. With the last of his strength, he stumbled back to the spiral staircase. Step by step, he climbed, his lantern long. Extinguished, guided only by the faint promise of light above at last, he emerged into the ruined library. The candles had guttered out. The shelves lay toppled, the great oak table split in two. Dawn light filtered through the cracked window, painting the devastation in pale gold. Adrian sank to the floor, staring at the horizon. The monastery was crumbling, dust sifting down from the ceiling, but he no longer cared. He had sealed the eye. He had saved the world or delayed its end. But he had also destroyed the Codex, the one thing he had sought his entire life. The truth was gone, locked forever beyond reach. And yet, as he sat in the ruins, watching the sunrise, he felt something stir within him. Not knowledge, not visions, but a presence, subtle, lingering, as though the architect still watched through cracks in reality. He closed his eyes, shivering. Perhaps he had sealed the eye, but the eye had not sealed him. As the first rays of morning warmed his face, Adrian whispered to the empty air, "It's over." But in the corner of the library, deep in the shadows between the light, something blinked.